Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first event in our Life After Graduation series. My name is Valerie Moses. I'm the chair of the College of Sciences chapter, and I graduated from UCF in 2013 with my bachelor's degree in advertising and public relations, and then again in 2018 with my MBA. So on behalf of the College of Sciences Alumni Board, I would like to thank you all for joining us tonight. Our board consists of a dedicated group of College of Sciences alumni volunteers who strive to provide valuable networking and social events for our fellow Knights. Given the current situation, these experiences will be hosted virtually, but we look forward to the days when we can get together again in person and on our beautiful campus. During the pandemic, we understand the struggles that our students and alumni are facing right now, and as a board, we wanted to be there to give back in these challenging times. Through our Life After Graduation series, we're able to gather virtually to share firsthand insights from our incredibly accomplished alumni in a variety of fields. Tonight's event launches a three-part series this fall semester, and we hope you enjoy this event and will join us for the rest of the series later this fall. Before we introduce our esteemed panelists, I just wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping items. This event is being recorded. Following the presentations, we have a Q&A. At this time, we welcome you to ask the panelists questions. You can use the Q&A feature to ask them questions at this time. And if you need technical assistance from Zoom during the event, please call 188-799-9666. In addition, I will be sharing the links to our Facebook group and LinkedIn group if you'd like to connect with the College of Sciences Alumni chapter after this event. I hope to see you there. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Samantha Rosenthal, one of our board members and tonight's event moderator. Samantha graduated from UCF in 2014 with a degree in journalism and a minor in mathematics. She is a current UCF graduate student who will be graduating in December 2020 with a master's degree in communication and a corporate communication graduate degree. She has assisted in research during her graduate schooling, including presenting her findings as a research poster at the 9th Annual International Crisis and Risk Communication Conference. Let's welcome Samantha.
Thank you, Valerie. And hi, everyone. We're so excited to have you here tonight for this panel and very excited to get into it. Thank you for taking time out of your evening. And before we begin, let's introduce some of tonight's panelists. First off, we have William Maddens. He is a Veteran Service Representative with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs in the Lincoln Regional Office. He graduated from UCF in 2014 with a BA in Political Science, and again in 2018 with an MA in Political Science and a graduate certificate in Intelligence and National Security. We also have Dr. Catherine Mejia, who received her PhD in Combined Counseling and School Psychology from the State University of New York, University at Buffalo in May 2019. She is currently an adjunct professor for the Graduate School of Education at SUNY University at Buffalo and just completed a postdoctoral fellowship in health psychology at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. She's currently in the process of becoming a licensed as a clinical psychologist, and she attended the University of Central Florida as an undergraduate student and graduated in 2013 with a dual degree in Spanish and psychology, as well as a certificate in substitute teaching. And finally, we have Dr. Tamara Downs, who is a 2013 UCF alumna and a 2017 University of Florida College of Veterinary Medicine alumna. She's also a Florida native. She's currently working as a shelter veterinarian at Orange County Animal Services, which is her dream job, serving homeless pets in our community. So let's dive in with our questions. Don't forget, if you have any questions throughout the panel, just submit them, and please feel free to use the question and answer function, and we will try to get to all your questions in the time allotted. So first off, all our panelists, if you would like to turn on your videos, and then we can get into our questions. Awesome. So first off, just want to talk a little bit, describe your graduate school journey. You know, why did you choose to go to graduate school, and what made you choose to go either straight out of your undergraduate schooling or go into industry first and then went to graduate schooling? Whoever would like to start.
Okay, all right, I'll start then. I went straight from undergrad into veterinary school, and the main reason for that would be that the opportunities and mentorship were already there at UCF, and I wanted to take advantage of the research I was doing, the research mentor I had, and use that momentum to get me straight there. I did get early accepted into UF College of Veterinary Medicine. So it was just the setup and the motivation to get everything that needs to be done in the intensive time period of applying to vet school just made sense at that point in time. Basic reason. So I'll start with that.
Awesome.
I did the same thing as Dr. Downs. I also went straight from undergrad to my PhD program. That was also because I wanted to do, psychology, like being a psychologist was the end goal. And you really can't do much with an undergrad in psychology unless you go to grad school. Like, let's just call it out right now. So it wouldn't make much sense for me in the time to go into the industry. I could have worked, in other fields that were still helping fields that were related. But I was also doing undergraduate research. I had a mentor very similar to Dr. Downs. So it just worked really well, everything that I was doing in my undergrad to really kind of propel me into the PhD program. I was initially going to do a master's first, but my mentor enlightened me and said, you don't need to always do a master's. You can actually do a PhD, and they're funded most of the time versus a master's that isn't always funded. So that also propelled me to get a doctorate, because I was going to ultimately I wanted to get a doctorate, but it also facilitated with finances and other things that we have to also worry about.
Awesome. Very, very good point, and something we will possibly touch on further down in the panel.
So I guess I could speak for a second about that too. I went actually, I didn't go straight into graduate school, but I ultimately knew I wanted to become more proficient in the field and have more opportunities to advance my career prospects. So I took an 8-month break between my bachelor and master's degree, and I continued working, but not within my field. But I was picking up, work-related skills so that, I could kind of have those skills for my future career. And when I got into the program, I actually accepted a graduate assistantship. I was the managing editor for the Journal of Political Science Education in the political science department, and eventually I applied to BA Pathways with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and kind of worked my way up to a permanent federal employee, which is what I knew I wanted to do as my end goal.
Awesome. So you guys kind of all talked a little bit about that. So would you say, recalling these experiences, would you do anything maybe differently or slightly different that maybe would have helped or made things easier now that you have it in hindsight?
So I was involved with the RAMP program, the Research and Mentoring Program, when I was at UCF. And I was kind of encouraged to do the McNair Scholars Program, but at the time I didn't know what kind of research I wanted to do. So I got really intimidated by going with the McNair, because McNair kind of does require a lot more work. But in hindsight, I should have done McNair, because when you apply to grad schools, they'll ask you if you're a McNair scholar. And if you are, I think they often waive the fee to apply to their program. It helps you to really bolster that research if research is something you want to keep going on. So I loved RAMP. I don't regret doing it at all, but I think in hindsight, I really would have done McNair Scholars, if that is available to you, to really get that. There's just so much mentorship, and it's really rich program, which I'm all for. So I would have done that differently.
I know that I wish I had had more opportunities to do more hands-on work. So with my particular doctorate being a veterinarian, a lot of what can be looked at initially with your application is how much hands-on work you get to do. Unfortunately, what they don't tell you is how difficult it is to get hands-on work, especially when you are just an undergrad student and nobody wants to take on the liability of letting an undergrad student look at animals and stand behind you while you do procedures and whatnot. So I think I applied to 13 practices 2 times when I was in school, and I got rejected by all of them on the basis of experience, which I was never afforded. I also ended up in a very weird liability situation with another practice that I had to leave because I felt very unsafe, which it says a lot considering how hungry I was for that kind of practical experience. So I didn't really get going into school that kind of practical. I was a vet tech for 4 years, which in many ways afforded a lot of students who were at the same level as me in terms of being in the same class a great advantage. They knew how to do things regarding practical, clinical, drawing blood, being able to look at certain diagnostics and interpret them that I didn't know already. So I do wish I had more practical experience. I was very lucky that I got the kind of experience that I did on someone who was willing to take a chance on me. But yet again, it requires a lot of like knowing people and a lot of being aggressive about asking for what you want from other doctors, particularly if you're looking for local experience, just because it's a lot to ask of them too. So I do wish I got more practical experience. It would have helped, but it did kind of shape the vet that I became today because it made me much more hungry as a student. So it kind of goes both ways.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add, Will?
I was going to say I probably would have done the same thing if I had the chance again. I probably would have taken the hiatus from school. But that's not to say that everybody is going to have that same kind of feeling and experience. I just kind of needed a break. I think that if some people take a break, it kind of avoids burnout. But you can contrast that to someone like my wife, who's afraid that she wouldn't go back to school if she left school for a period of time. So I guess it really depends on the person. Some people get burned out more easily than others.
Awesome.
And I was going to say, I do agree with you, Will. I did know several students who needed to take time, and they went and did amazing things. They got masters and doctorates, and some of them just took a year off because they needed to, and they had the patience and the practice to go back in. And so that's also a really valid and worthy way of approaching it to protect yourself, really.
Just to piggyback off what my 2 peers said, I honestly think that I would have been that person who probably wouldn't have gotten a doctorate if I took time off. Just because it is taxing when you have some of that freedom, you're like, oh my gosh, But I think what you talk about, Will, about burnout is so important because we don't really recognize it, acknowledge it, or talk about it. And then you could be burned out as an undergrad. And then when you kind of plow through, you're in your final year of your grad program, whatever that is, and you're like hanging by a thread because you're so tired and exhausted. So I think just really taking in consideration that compassion, that burnout, all of those things are so important. So if a break is needed, whether it's 8 months, a year, 2, whatever it is, it's really important to kind of listen to yourself in that way too, because you're more successful when you do allow yourself to have that break.
Awesome. And I love that you guys are touching on burnout because we're going to talk a little bit about that and imposter syndrome in a bit. And I will say, as someone who is about to finish their master's program, just a little hindsight, my journey is a little different than the people here. I actually took 4 years off in between starting my master's program, and I worked in my industry, and I worked full-time while getting my master's part-time. And it took me about 3.5 years. So everyone's journey is different, as the panelists said. So the next question we have is, what is the best advice you have received from a person in either your professional or personal life that has helped you along your graduate school journey?
Everything is being woven so beautifully tonight because that very part what you said, Samantha, about not every journey's the same. So for me, it's like, don't compare yourself to others. And it does not matter how long it takes, as long as you complete what you want to complete. Because I think this idea, right, when you compare yourself to your friends who's finishing in 3 years and 2, and like Sam, you said it took you, 3 years to finish. My program is 5 to 7 years and it took me 6. And I think part of me comparing myself to my peers was really kind of bringing me down at one point, where I realized their lives and my lives are completely different. They're not going through what I'm going through, and we don't know everyone's story. So really about focusing on yourself and not comparing yourself to others, because at the end of the day, everyone's going to be able to achieve what they want. But when we make that comparison, it kind of steals our own joy and our own happiness and our own ability to feel proud of the work we've done, because we did a lot and we got to that point, and it doesn't matter when or how you did it, right?
Yeah, so there's two that I can think of. And one of the phrases that was given to me as a piece of advice is actually among my peers. And it's going to sound kind of coarse, but the short of it was called C = DVM. So the idea that you don't have to get straight A's, you don't have to be the first person in your class, and you don't have to be the top of the line to get your doctorate of veterinary medicine. And in my field in particular, the prestige of your grades doesn't really amount to as much as your experiences and your ability to present yourself as a person in our career field. Because a lot of my, and I can't speak for my colleagues, but I imagine to some extent this also applies, a lot of my job is actually dealing with people. So for those of you who are sitting back going like, I want to be a vet because I get to play with animals all day, that's actually not usually the case. Even in my limited job in shelter medicine, where arguably I don't have clients, a lot of my work is dependent upon my relationships with both my colleagues that work with me at the shelter, as well as the technicians and nurses that support me and make sure that the job gets done at the end of the day. So the C = DVM kind of encompassed a lot of things. It encompassed not wanting to be number one, because you don't need to be. It's about you getting what you need to get out of to become the person that you envision being. And yet again, to back up Dr. Mejia, it's about what your journey means to you. And also it meant making sure you carve out the rest of your life too, because I can say that being a veterinarian has been my dream. This is exactly what I wanted to do. This is my career. This is where I'm at. But that's not the only aspect about my life that exists. I'm a dancer, for example. That's how I'm. To relax, and knowing how to relax is really important. So that was the first piece. And then the second piece of advice was really to make sure that you got the job that you wanted. And yet again, I'm sure there's some of this that speaks to you guys as well, but a lot of times in graduate work and in my doctorate work as a veterinarian, when you're first starting out, you're kind of taught to take what you can get. And trial by fire. So you take what you can get and you suffer just as much as everyone else did before you, because that's what you're supposed to do. I went through 2 jobs in less than 2 years, just about, because I wasn't satisfied with what I had. And I kind of kept that advice in mind. It actually came from a horse veterinarian, and I have no interest in equine medicine at all. But she did offer me the best advice in the sense that you really have to carve out what you want, because at the end of the day, you got to be getting home and feeling content with yourself. And so shelter medicine was what I wanted, but shelter medicine is not usually what people who first get out in my field get. And it did take me a little less time. It's a little under 2 years, and I had to cycle through some jobs, but a lot of that was just keeping in mind that like I really needed what I wanted. And when I got a job and it wasn't what I wanted, or if I was suffering in a way that I didn't feel supported, I needed to get out and find something else. And every time, that kind of fight and that mindset is what led me to the supportive team and the work that I do now in the shelter.
Awesome.
My wife likes to remind me of this saying all the time that her grandfather used to always say to her, and that's that lazy people work twice as hard. Because you have to kind of catch up if you procrastinate and put things off. And I find that to be true constantly in my personal and professional life. And I made the mistake in my when doing my master's of procrastinating, kind of putting things off to last minute. And in the beginning of my degree program, it wasn't that bad. I could, manage my time, catch up. But as I got further and further along, and it became time to begin searching for a thesis topic, doing the research, being kind of independent, doing that independent work and being responsible and not being told what to do and when to do it by, I kind of learned that that was a problem and that I kind of had to get myself back on track. So constantly all the time when I start to do something, I'm in my personal and professional life and I say, I'll put it off till later, that saying that, and if I don't remind myself, my wife will, she'll say, lazy people work twice as hard. So that's a really good, phrase to keep in the back of your mind.
Totally understand. As someone who is also doing their thesis right now, I have to constantly tell myself the same thing. So it's great, and that's all great advice, which kind of, like Dr. Mejia said, it kind of rolls into our next question, which you guys kind of touched on already. Have any of you dealt with imposter syndrome? I know it's talked about in graduate schooling a lot, and talk about some ways that you were able to overcome it, because I know that for some graduate students, it's a very difficult thing, especially in the beginning.
I'm going to be real blunt and honest right now. I don't think it ever goes away. I think it's almost like this process, right? Like you start grad school, you're like, oh my God, I don't know anything. And then you go on to this next, like for me in my PhD program, we did clinicals. So every year I was in a different site. And every year I would start off not feeling like I didn't know a thing. And at the end I was like, I got this. But then the next year start over again, right? So it's this process where up until my postdoc, when I'm ready, have the doctorate degree, I'm getting my hours for licensing. And there was still that point where I was like, oh my gosh, but I think at the end, reminding yourself what you know, kind of hyping yourself up, but also reinforcing you have the skill set. You're the expert in your field knowing this, right? But I will say, I don't think imposter syndrome is the worst thing because it keeps us on our toes. It keeps us constantly checking ourselves and asking ourselves, am I doing the best work for the people I'm working with or the animals or the individuals? So I think there's, I'm trying to look at a little positiveness to that because I do think with imposter syndrome, when I do experience it, I wonder, am I doing something wrong? Am I not doing the best for my clients? I need to check myself in that moment to make sure why I'm experiencing it. But I think as time goes on, you start to develop that confidence within yourself, right? And hopefully with good mentorship, supervisors, peers, because even at this point, I rely on my supervisors, I rely on peers, peer supervision when I'm talking about a client that I'm not sure about or a case where, whatever it may be, relying on those people to really either tell you, girl, you need to rethink that, or, you know what, no, you're on the right track. And I think that really helps. But being open and willing to ask for help, being open and willing to really look within yourself and question it. And that takes a lot of introspection and sometimes some self-awareness that may feel uncomfortable because we like to be like, oh, I know what I'm doing, but it's okay to not know too. Because especially as your early career in the beginning, when you're getting started, it's going to feel terrifying sometimes. But you'll do it. You got it.
So I would have to agree with you that I don't think it really ever does go away. There are times in my career still where I have that feeling of I have no idea what I'm doing right now. Like I'll be working on something and I just feel totally lost. And in grad school too, I would be sitting in a class going, I have no idea what I'm doing, working on my thesis. Like I don't even know if I'm going to be an expert in this topic, but you kind of take that step back. You kind of reassess, you look at, if you're in grad school, you kind of look and say, well, I've gotten through a few semesters, it was hard work, but, I passed my courses, so I know what I'm doing, and you kind of bring that confidence level back up. And currently in my job, how I deal with it in my career is that, I think about all the positive feedback that I get from my superiors. I think about the performance standards that we're on, and I look back and say, my performance metrics show my output and my quality of my work is decent, and it's above decent, it's superior to some others. And so I say that, it's just kind of all in my head. But I also agree that it's kind of, it is kind of good to suffer it too a little bit because it kind of brings you back down to earth and kind of keeps you, rechecking yourself and kind of making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do.
that is something that gets discussed a lot when you're as a veterinary student, as you go through the process. Imposter syndrome is brought up all the time. And I feel like sometimes, and I hope that culture will change soon, but most facilities like that, UF's not really unique, kind of enforce this idea that you never know everything. And that kind of attitude kind of, it's good because it makes you want to learn more, but it's at some point too, it does kind of feel like you're digging a hole and you don't know where the bottom is, and everything is confusing, and there's so many different processes, and there's so many different parts of the body and species. But I do think that getting my process has been kind of going beyond it, and I don't know that I call it imposter syndrome anymore, but more like a real frank honesty with being wrong. So like at my job, when I working at the shelter, it's, especially in a local government, things are very much dictated by what your position is. So whether you're in a supervisory position, whether you're in a managerial position, you are supposed to listen to the person above you, and then the people below you are supposed to listen to you. And as a vet, that doesn't really read very well, because if you do trip up, and arguably managing 200 to 500 animals every day, you're probably going to, you do need people to help check you. And so one of the things that I worked really hard to kind of fuse my, like what I was feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing, but also kind of reassure myself that there are resources for me out there, is to make sure that whether it was my manager or whether it was the technicians who were doing the things that I asked them to do, that everyone had the opening to kind of be like, well, what, isn't it easier to do this? Or maybe, like, I don't actually know about that, because I think this, I don't know if the situation could work like that if we bring the animal here versus bringing the animal there. And so having that constant feedback, and then being able to like mentally
Where is it? Dr. Downs, I think we lost your audio.
like this as much as
It's back.
Oh, did you?
Back now. It's back now. Your audio was out. It's going in and out a little bit.
Oh, okay.
It is back now though. Sorry.
Okay. Let me know if that happens again. But yeah, so the other thing I love is that I work with 2 other veterinarians, and our work is very collegial. So like it's not, there's no financial push or motivation involved in my job, which can happen in some veterinary positions. We're entirely dependent upon each other to carry each other's work and to work shift to shift with each other. And so they also cover by both reflecting when I do have imposter syndrome, they reflect it back and they're like, sometimes I don't know what I'm doing either. But also being my backup, kind of the way that Dr. Mejia was saying, like, you have other people who will be like, don't do that. Or that's, I didn't actually think of that before. That's actually a great idea. And I think surrounding yourself with both mentors and colleagues that you trust to kind of be honest with you and not to just push you up or push you down is super, super important.
Awesome. Thank you, you guys. So we're going to jump into some of the questions we've been receiving. We have quite a few. So we're going to try to get to all of them in the time that we have left, because we would really love to answer the questions that these students are having. So let me find the first one. One student asks, and these are a little lengthy because some of them have provided a bit of background about their educational experience thus far, either in undergrad or what they did in undergrad if they're considering jumping back in from industry. So the first person asked, when should I begin applying for graduate school if I'm planning on going to grad school straight out of undergrad? I am a psychology major. So I don't know if maybe Dr. Mejia, you have any advice on that?
So it depends on what kind of program you're trying to go after. From what I remember and applied a million years ago, I'm exaggerating, but I think doctoral programs, December 1st, I believe, is a deadline. And then for master's programs, they have, I think it's like March, April, I think UCF, I applied to UCF's master program as well, and I think they had like an earlier deadline. So I think it really depends what program you want to go to. So start looking at that first. But if you are already kind of have an idea, then even start talking to the professors or the people you want letters of rec from now, letting them know you're going to apply to these programs and you're going to need this, because the more of a heads up you give them, the better they are to accommodate. But here's a tip someone always told me. When you ask for a letter of recommendation, ask them, can you write me a good letter recommendation? Because apparently some people will write you a letter that is not a good one. So just kind of start thinking about that now. We're early in September, so you got some time, but I think this is a great thing to start thinking about now.
Awesome. The next person, this is a bit of a long question, so bear with me, everyone. Hello, I graduated with a BS in psychology in 2016. I then took a year off to relax and eventually find a job with a company who provides behavioral therapy services for children with autism and other disorders. I was a behavior interventionist, someone who implements the behavior plan for the particular client and home. Now I'm the only admin in our Denver office, as it was my strengths were in administrative duties and organization. Originally, I planned to go to grad school for counseling or possibly clinical psych, maybe even neuropsychology. I'm often intimidated to apply for graduate school, taking the GRE, having LORs, etc. If you have any advice for me, thank you. So.
If anyone else has I think that, first of all, you have a wealth of experience. And one thing that I was always taught, so for my postdoc, I was at a hospital in a medical setting. I had never been in a medical setting before. I had never been in a hospital. I have a counseling psych background. I applied, I took the chance, and they took the chance on me. And something that when I spoke to my now former supervisors, it was really about the skill set that I have and how is it transferable. Sometimes we get intimidated because we think, oh, it doesn't fit exactly what they want, or it's not exactly what they need. And I think all of that in knowledge and experience you've gained in that environment is huge, super marketable. So it's about, how do you sell yourself, right? How do you let them see who you are and how you can bring this skill set to the program. But also in grad school, that's where you learn everything, right? So in grad school is where you meet with the people, you take these practicum experiences, it's where you learn from the classes. So you're already have a pretty big leg up in a lot of other ways. So I can totally understand feeling intimidated, but you can get letters of recommendation from the people you worked at. If you're in administrative, who else was higher up there? Who'd you work with? Who trained you? Like I said, not every journey is linear. Not every person is going to go straight from undergrad in a little bow tie. And I think what you have, the experience you have, is really rich. So don't sell yourself short. Don't let that imposter syndrome get to you. And don't downplay what you have, because that's way more than I had when I went. I mean, I did research, but I didn't do all that. So.
Awesome. Next we have, hi, Dr. Downs, go Gators. Would you recommend taking a gap year or going straight into vet school? Which you kind of touched on a bit. If you want to maybe talk a little more.
Oh man, unfortunately, that's not really a question I can answer for one person. You kind of have to decide where you're at. And I think, speaking to what Will was saying before, knowing whether you're going to feel prepared to go back in if you dip out. So the part of that understanding is that if you do take a gap year, are you sure that you have the resources and you have the materials to jump back in, apply, and then run yourself straight back into more like academia? Because vet school is usually, at least your first 2 years, are straight classes. And so I did run across, in the breadth of people that I met and the experiences that I got, I had people who did take gap years and they were techs for a year or two, and they kind of just got really comfortable in the field, but not in the being a veterinarian first. And they were totally ready to apply. They had all the dates listed up. They had money saved up to submit the applications. And I'm sure that my other two colleagues can agree with me, applying to postgraduate, whether it is a doctorate in veterinary medicine, a master's, or just a doctorate period, is very expensive and almost insulting considering how much money you're going to spend if you do get in. So I would just say that if you are thinking about doing a gap year, I would really make sure, one, that you're going to be happy there, because taking that break, and if you're burning out, that's definitely going to be a good option for you. And two, that you have the support system and the resources to jump back in. Because I know that once we get to applications, Dr. Mejia touched on it, you have deadlines, you're going to be responsible for certain things. And if your gap year involves like maybe getting more practical experience, that means making sure you can set aside the time within your practical experience in this life that you've carved out in this time off to do that. For some people that works out very well. For me in particular, I was also suffering from that. It was suffering from a lack of experience, but I also kind of also weirdly justified that as I really just needed to jump in right now and get that experience straight from vet school. So that's what happened to work for me. And I also used UCF in my degree, not to kind of play around, but to explore what my interests were and to really enjoy myself. I know I joined Latin Rhythm. I met Samantha on several occasions through different dance events. So I really used my undergraduate degree not only to get research experience, to get academic experience, to really explore what I wanted to do, but also to enjoy different aspects of my life while I was doing it. So I didn't feel the need to have a gap year as much because I wasn't burning out. I kind of wish you could think about that more in vet school because they don't give you very many breaks, but that's not really the option once you get there. So you kind of have to carve it out while you're in. So that's what I would say. Kind of think about what you want and what's going to make you happy and best prepared to jump back into doing a doctorate in veterinary medicine.
Awesome. Thank you. Another Dr. Mejia, I plan on doing a doctorate too and wanted to know what you recommend I do get a doctorate without doing a master's like you did.
So I think getting involved in undergraduate research is kind of the most important thing, especially for a doctorate, because they do require you to do research in doc programs and you will have to do a dissertation. So the avenue that I got involved in, I actually was a scholar for the Summer Research Academy. And that was like, I think I did that like my second year. So it was like a 3-day thing where you like learn about all this research opportunity at UCF. And then they kind of take you on like these little tours of all these little things you can do research on. So it's really cool because I had no idea where to start. I'm a first generation college student. So I felt like I was floundering in UCF, which is a huge, right? Like I'm a little guppy in a sea. So going to these activities and these panels like you all are doing now is really a great way to get an idea of where can I do research? How can I do it? So I started there and then I got involved with RAMP through that program. And in the Summer Research Academy is where I learned about the Marriage and Family Research Institute, which is where I ended up doing research for 2 years. And my mentor, Dr. Andrew Dare, was there. He's no longer there. He's in a different institution now. But all of that involvement, I did presentations, poster presentations, research, things like that really helped in the beginning. So definitely undergrad research. Make sure that, you know, your grades are up, things like that, that you can get letters of recommendation. I know in psych programs, it can be hard because there's such big classes. So you kind of want to stand out to your professors. Someone once told me, like, go up and ask them a question, even if it's like a silly question, right? So really trying to already start connecting so that people know you. You may not need to get a letter of recommendation from your professor, but if you have a mentor, he can write you, or she, they, them, can write you a letter of recommendation. I also have a degree in Spanish, so I actually utilized my Spanish professors to write me letters because their classes were smaller. They got to know me a little better. You know, really wanting to show that you're a well-rounded person, that you are really focused and you have an idea. When you're writing your letter, your essay or letter of intent to them, make sure you look at the professors who are working in the program. Make sure that you've picked out someone, because I didn't know this, but make sure you pick out someone whose research you're interested in and kind of tailor it to that too. Because I didn't do that, and I wish someone would have told me, you know, tailor what you're writing to who you want to work with, why you want to work with them, and then how your experiences once again translate. You don't have to have carbon copy experiences. It doesn't have to be the same, but you sell yourself and translate or transfer those skills, right? Because all our skills are transferable, right?
Awesome. And thank you again, everyone, for your patience. We know you have lots of questions and we're trying to get to all of them as soon as we can. The next question we have is from it says, what are the benefits of RAMP, R-A-M-P?
I can answer this one too, because it's really funny. Dr. Marty and I both did SRA and did RAMP, which is fantastic. The benefits of RAMP, I think, kind of tie into what Dr. Mejia was already talking about. RAMP directly links you to a research professor and gets you, actually, some of the legwork has to be done by you. You have to reach out to someone, you have to make those connections, and then they have to apply with you in order for you to receive the benefits of the program and to be enrolled in the program. But once you get there, I felt like it created a definitive bond between me and my mentor, because he did have multiple students in there, and they were like, you had some people who were RAMP, you had masters, you had PhD students. So it gave you kind of like an agenda with your mentor, like, we need to get this done, we need to sit and talk about this. So it kind of forces you to have a personal connection with the person you're doing research with, which you would think is like super important and intuitive, but it isn't all the time, depending on what kind of research you're doing. I know in psychology, there's so much going on that you can easily get lost within it, because most of that department is research based. Like, you need to get involved in research. And so standing out by having a mentor that you're linked to and them having the benefit of getting funding so that you two can work together is a huge benefit to RAMP. And I also feel like understanding research in general, which is part of the program, it's not just doing your research, it's also kind of looking at other kinds of research and being involved with other people, is a universal benefit to have. I know that people don't think about it as much. Like, you would think in a PhD, yes, you need to know about research and how things are done. In my field as a doctor, that's still very important. Like, a lot of veterinary medicine isn't about super definitive yes or no medicine as much as you think it is. A lot of it is about reading what current research is going on and being able to read it and evaluate it. Because I did notice that even though I didn't have practical experience, some of my colleagues would read something and be like, oh my God, this is crazy. And I'm like, they only used 3 dogs for this paper. I don't think this is super reliable, and these p-values look ridiculous. And so knowing how to read research allows me to filter through what kinds of medicine I can feel safe about, or I can feel comfortable kind of exploring a little bit more, which in shelter medicine is hugely important, because I'm not talking about one patient, I'm talking about a couple hundred and different species. So yeah, it's a universal language that's taught to you through RAMP. And I feel like that's super important. And monies too. I can't underrate that you got paid, and that's like super important.
Awesome.
Sorry, I just think one more thing, and I don't know, Dr. Downs, if they did this for you, but I also was able to partake in GRE courses for free because I was part of RAMP. And I don't know if they changed that. So I graduated in 2013, so let's remember how long ago that was. But at that time, I really got that support too, which, you know, like Dr. Downs says, money is important. GRE classes are very expensive. So being able to really have that was a huge asset for me at the time.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And then now another question we have are, what are some recommendations for finding your first internship or job? Maybe post-grad school?
I guess we could talk about looking for a veterinary job. So recommendations, talk to people. I think that's kind of universal too. Like, that's not actually really specific. And you'll find that a lot, that like a lot of your work and journey is actually based on very universal aspects. And one of those is like talking to people. You know, you have colleagues, you have people you'll meet incidentally. I got a job offer from someone that a practice that I got really close with, the owners, and I'm still very close with them. But I got that job offer because a friend of mine went to a meeting, said she liked this doctor. I said, oh, I like doing that kind of medicine. Took the card from her and emailed them. And that sparked an externship, which sparked a very deep relationship, because I was doing a lot of Chinese veterinary medicine at the time. And they were very, very interested in someone who felt that strongly as early as like being in school. And then I got a job offer. I didn't end up taking it, but that relationship has lasted about 7 or 8 years. And that's someone that I can take my own animals to. That's someone that I've come to for advice when my own programs and shelter medicine have needed things to talk about with regards to exercise or rehab. A lot of that ties into itself. And so it's really about talking to people and fostering those connections. And some of it is just about getting out of your comfort zone and just doing a dry run with someone that you don't know very well. Because you'd be surprised at how many people are willing to reach back out to you and how impressed they'll be by your boldness and that insight. So as long as you really want it and as long as you're going for it and you make those connections, you'll be surprised at what you'll get to.
Awesome, thank you.
I think, so I finished my postdoc like maybe 20 something days ago. And I'm an adjunct instructor right now, but I'm actually in the process of applying for a psychologist position, but I still have to like go through the licensing. So I'm doing kind of both concurrently. So I've been applying to like 1,001 places and I'm just jumping and taking the leap. And if it looks remotely interesting, I'm applying. And I get interviews, and even the interviews I'm not crazy about, I'm like, you know what, this is experience. So I'm kind of at the tail end where I'm like trying to get like a real big person job because everything else has been training up until now. 11 years of training, imagine. But in all of this, it's about putting yourself out there, like Dr. Down says, you know, the connections. I actually had an interview because of someone that was in a position that I was in this year. They were in the position a few years ago. She sent an email to my supervisor. I emailed her. I haven't interviewed on Friday with somebody else, but it's just about like getting out of your comfort zone. It's not fun to apply and get rejected or not even hear back, but it's about, you know, go for what you want. Don't take anything just cause. I know that's a very privileged thing to say, especially with COVID and what's happening right now, but apply. Don't give up. And if you feel like you're not getting any hits, reach out to someone. Can you read my CV? Can you read my letter of interest, my cover letter? What do you think I should do differently? If you're still a student at UCF, I don't know how some of the programs are happening, but I know that there's some that you can do like interviews with or practice interviews, at least in my grad program we could do. So kind of looking at those resources and talking to people. If you find like you're not getting anywhere what you want and you're kind of struggling, kind of reevaluate and reassess like what needs to change maybe.
I would also say too, kind of that making connections and networking is very important. One site that I would definitely use that I think we probably all use here is get a LinkedIn profile. Put your resume out there with all of your skills, you know, what you're searching for. Some other good sites to use, like for example, I found my Pathways internship through usajobs.gov. They have, you know, that's where the federal government posts all their positions, including internships. So that's how I found that. So you can put your resume there and you can set it to alert you when something that matches, you know, what you're looking for pops up. So, you know, just kind of, you know, use resources like that and kind of put yourself out there.
Awesome. So another question we have is, what are the major differences in being in an undergraduate program versus going to graduate school? The person is curious on level of difficulty, and I think this is great because you all kind of have different programs. So I guess you can talk to difficulty in a hard science versus a soft science, which is very different in graduate schooling experience.
Man, oh goodness. Yeah, it's totally different. Arguably, I spent a lot of time in like college preparatory magnet programs when I was in high school, particularly the International Baccalaureate program. So I felt like I was already kind of college trained. And it's not that it made it like impossibly easy. It's just that I had a really good grip of what was going on. And when I got to vet school, it was just very crushing. And that's not to discourage anyone. It's just like, it's more that you're being expected to know. I think another important thing too is like, especially with undergrad, you have basic requirements and they don't always have very much to do with what your major is. Like I took an algebra course and actually that was more useful than the calculus course that I took because most of my math is to determine drug doses and calculus has nothing to do with that right now. So not everything that I did in undergrad was necessarily relatable. So your ability to kind of like just skate by or invest in what you needed to was more present. Whereas in vet school, like microbiology is pretty important and builds off of everything that you're going to learn up until the point where you got your white coat on. So it's pedal to the metal because now everything is relevant and you cannot pass up on the opportunity to take this relevancy and connect it to a bigger picture. And so I think it's not just that it's more difficult, it's that this is what you want to do. This is your job, this is your career. And so I think it's a simultaneous thing of feeling pressure to make the connections to understand all of the things, but also to do well and to do twice the amount of work in the same amount of time. Because I definitely had arguably like 12 class or 14 classes in one semester. That's not the same thing as undergrad at all. I don't even know that you're allowed to do that at UCF. I don't know. I never got to that point. So I think it's relevancy, and it is more work. So it is going to be harder. It's going to take a little bit more nosediving and figuring out how to deal and cope appropriately.
Awesome.
I think really to echo Dr. Downs, it's at least with psych degrees, and I'm not bashing it because I loved my years at UCF, but it was super easy that I could get 2 degrees. And then I'm doing grad school work where like sleep is not an option. And I know it may sound kind of exaggerating, but when you're taking like, 5 or 6 courses, and then you're doing a graduate assistantship, which is like, part-time, but then you're also doing clinical work, and that is expected to, be Monday through Friday, you're going to do maybe 50 plus hours. And then you're like, well, how do I do my laundry? How do I cook? How do I eat? How do I take care of myself? So it's really about time management. Will touched on it about being very independent on some of the things you do when it was like writing his thesis. Like, yeah, you don't have people like, I mean, even now as an undergrad instructor, I don't email my students telling them you didn't turn in an assignment. You didn't turn it in, you get a 0. And that's hard for some to kind of recognize. So I try to prepare my students for grad school because the flexibility may be there sometimes and it sometimes isn't. It's a bit of like a harsh reality check, and it almost tries to like weed out those who are not ready to put in the work, because I think everyone can. It's just level of readiness. So it is a shocker, and it is very different, especially if you are used to maybe me having someone kind of work side by side with you, and you may need to find different accommodations or different ways to be able to be successful. It's really about time management, getting to know yourself and knowing how you work best. I know someone who used to go to sleep at 2 a.m. to sleep for a few hours, do work until 2 a.m. and then sleep, or someone who'd go to sleep at 7, wake up at like 2 to do work, because it's about a balance that is not sustainable. I will say it's not sustainable, and that's why there's an end to it. And I don't mean to scare you, but it's also a bit of a reality check of what to expect.
I would describe my first semester of grad school as getting hit by a bus. It was much different than I thought it was going to be. Getting a political science degree, it was much more of, you go to class, you take your notes, you get your study guide, you take your exams, you maybe have a paper here and there. But then in grad school, it was much more reading. And the classes were not, traditional courses where the professor just gets up in front of a class, and teaches. They were seminars. So the professor would, we would all discuss the material. You'd bounce ideas off of each other. Do you agree with, this paper? What do you think about this? And kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And then, you have these papers and you kind of present it to the class and to have more discussions. And I didn't realize that was what it would be. I thought, it's going to, you're going to go learn some more higher level things, but it'll be kind of the same. And that was a reality check for me. So in the end, of course, it was very rewarding. And once I kind of got the hang of how the courses, worked, it was much more enjoyable because you can kind of have debates and things. But yeah, it's vastly different in my experience, at least.
Awesome. And I want to ask a quick question. Will, you said that in your graduate schooling that you went a thesis route, correct?
Yes, correct.
Awesome. So if you can, because I know they, Doctors Downs and Mejia talked a little bit about what research looks like for them. And as someone who also is studying in the soft sciences, I think some students have not a full understanding of what research is for someone that's maybe doing communications or political science. So can you just, briefly touch on maybe what the thesis process was like for you and how research looks like for maybe someone that's doing something other than a hard science in grad school? Because I think that could be helpful.
So you kind of, I kind of had my audio kind of glitched out a minute. So you basically were asking what does kind of the research process for a thesis look like? Is that kind of
Yeah,
the gist
just
of?
to briefly like just touch on it because it's a little
Okay.
different than obviously hard sciences.
So it's actually funny how I ended up picking a topic for my thesis. I took a class in political theory and ended up writing a paper. And my professor, Dr. Marion, he actually came to me and said, you know, this was an interesting paper. Do you have a thesis topic yet? And I said, no, I don't. And I don't have, you know, an advisor. I kind of a little lost as to what I want to do. And he said, well, are you interested in expanding this idea? And I said, sure. And he actually volunteered to be my thesis chair, which so, and kind of me seeking out a professor, the professor sought me out, which I thought was kind of interesting. It was a lot of kind of starting with a more broad topic and, you know, meeting with him to kind of go over, you know, how I wanted to lay this topic out. And you would narrow it down until you kind of got to your research question, and then, you know, kind of organize your paper and whatnot. And again, a lot of reading. I was coming out of the library, you know, with stacks of books, you know, taller than me, looking like that, you know, stereotypical crazy professor carrying all the books, and staying up, you know, all night poring over these books and reading. It's a lot of, you know, discussions with your thesis chair, kind of to get that format that you want. A lot of editing, re-editing, and some more editing. And then eventually, you know, you kind of come up with a proposal. You know, you might present that to your committee. They give you some feedback. Then you go back and you just continue to hammer it out. And then you have, you know, your big presentation where you go before your committee, you present your idea, your conclusions. They even give you some more feedback. Sometimes they say you need major revisions, and you kind of got to go back to the drawing board. Sometimes it's very minor, which was in my case. Minor revisions, you know, you make them, and then they approve you. But again, the research is, for me at least, was just mostly reading different political texts and analyzing them to kind of work them into my topic.
Awesome, thank you. And I totally can relate. I, right before the beginning of the semester, just defended my thesis proposal, and it was probably the most scariest thing ever. But it was very helpful because like many of you said, your faculty and professors are really there to help you in grad school. And I think that's really a great thing to always keep in mind, especially if you go that route. So this is actually going to be our last question because we are up on time. So the last question we have, and it kind of flows from the question you just were talking about, is how do you realistically deal with anxiety, lack of motivation, or burnout while taking on such a demanding workload in grad school? So if each of you want to briefly touch on that.
Do something else. I'm going to be quite frank. You have to have resources, people, and life outside of your postgraduate work. You have to. I think one of the most depressing things that happened to me during vet school was being upset because we had a lot of work or it was a hard test, and every other student I went to had the exact same problem. And it sounds a little selfish, but like that doesn't really help me vent or get things off my chest or blow off steam or de-stress. So I had to be in other places. Like I said, I chose dancing. Other people I know that there were some students who had horses, and they would go out horseback riding, or they'd do that therapeutically or teach other people to. They had something else that they were going to do that had nothing to do with their textbooks or what they were studying for, or the next test or whatever. And you have to have that. And so keep in mind that your career is very important and you should be very passionate about it. But it's also very realistic to like be a whole person and do other things. And that will ultimately allow you to de-stress and cope very well, because I spent arguably 10 years, including UCF, carving out like an exercise aesthetic and a dance aesthetic and a social aesthetic that had nothing to do with my career, but very much complemented it and gave me a really great support network and the ability to cope with the stress in a way that didn't involve breaking down or giving in. Not to say that didn't happen, because it totally did. But you need to carve out a whole life for yourself. And that's super important, because this anxiety is not just going to come from school. I mean, we didn't even talk about like student debt. And that is a reality that you're going to have to live with and be very realistic about. it's a huge risk, and I mean, I obviously took it, so it's not one that is not worth it in the end, but it does stress you out. So I would just say, figure out all the things that make you passionate, all the things that make you happy, because your career is an important thing, but it is one of those things, and that one of those things is kind of the most important part of that phrase.
Very, very, very well said.
I want to say that that is very real, valid feelings you're having, because I think, especially during COVID, all of us are in these weird places where we're experiencing these different feelings and we don't always know what they are. The burnout, the sadness, the depression, the anxiety, it's prevalent. And especially when you're taking on a demanding course load, graduate school or regular undergrad doesn't stop, and your personal life doesn't stop either. So they're all going like two trains going in 100 miles per hour, and you're like, when am I going to take a break? Being the mental health professional, I'm going to put my little plug, utilize the counseling services. It is in your tuition. You do not have to pay for it. I went when I was an undergrad because my grandma died and a bunch of other stuff and breakups. And, you know, part of it is it's there to help you. There's no shame in it. If you want to be a psychologist, I went to therapy. I still go to therapy sometimes, and I'm going to do it. No one's going to prevent you from being a therapist because you're seeking out services. I want to normalize it, that getting help and speaking to someone is okay. I know in a lot of communities, like Latino communities, Black communities, it is not acceptable or okay because it goes against the norms that we're used to. And, you know, part of it is hard to break that. So I don't want to remove from the fact that culturally it can be difficult. But, you know, also gender stereotypes, all these things. When you're really struggling, look for help, whether it's through your faith, through work, not work, but work friends, towards with peers, but therapists, you know, people are there to help you. Like, it's in your tuition. You don't have to pay for it. So utilize it. And I know it's going to feel overwhelming. And I guess I just want to say that I've been there. I know what it's like. And I'm sure my peers have been there too. Find a confidant, a trusted person you can talk to. And if you ever feel like you can't handle it, National Suicide Hotline's there. You can text it, you can call it, any of these things. Because the point is, like Dr. Downs says, is that there's a whole world out there with so many amazing other things you can do and explore. And this is just a career. And this should not be the end of you because you can't handle it at the moment. Take a break if you need to. But yes, not to turn this sour, but really wanting to reinforce, look for help when you need it, no matter who you reach out to.
Super important.
I would definitely say to utilize that counseling service. I've used it myself as somebody who also has diagnosed anxiety. It can be, you know, on top of just the regular ins and outs of grad school, it can be even, you know, harder. So yeah, definitely use that resource. It is very helpful. And going back to what I said earlier, try not to, everybody does it at some point in their career, but try not to procrastinate. I know it can be very hard too. You know, don't wait to the last minute to write that paper, because then you're going to make yourself even more stressed. You're going to be cramming, you know, all night, staying up, not sleeping, you know, kind of set those little goals for yourself of, say, well, at least if I can read, you know, so much in a day, or if I can write so much of this paper in a day, you know, kind of set those smaller goals for yourself in order to reach the big goal. You know, don't wait to the last minute to do it, because then you're just going to burn out, you know, really fast, and you're going to be discouraged. I mean, there were times when I was working on my thesis and I just felt like, you know, I just want to be done. I'm just going to stop, you know, but I already put, you know, so much work into it. And, you know, if you stop before you get that thesis, you know, before you pass, that's it. All that work was for nothing, you know, and I mean, because you don't, you know, graduate. So, you know, it is scary, but, you know, if you pace yourself, you can do it.
Very great advice, which is funny because my chair tells me that all the time in doing my thesis right now, is that one thing he says is, you know, one small step at a time. Don't like look at it as I gotta get all 3 chapters from my proposal done. Just start with, let me just write the first couple paragraphs of the first chapter, then take it next, go back at it, go from there. And what's funny is because my way of, you know, getting things out when I was in grad school was I'm a marathon runner. So mentally I would tell myself, man, if I can run 26 miles, I can graduate from grad school. Because let me tell you, sometimes the marathon stuff seems a little harder. But before we end, if you guys in 1 to 2 sentences can give everyone that's still on with us, and for everyone that'll watch this, some parting words of advice in 1 to 2 sentences, what would it be for grad school and the grad experience?
I guess I'll go first. Make sure it's something you really want to do. My sister applied to a grad program and decided she didn't want to, and I think it was the best thing she could have done. Sometimes we feel like we need to get more, do more because it looks good or because so-and-so has it. But if your heart is not fully into it, like Samantha said, like it's going to feel like a 22 point whatever mile run every single day until you finish. And you're going to go into debt most likely about it with it. So do it at your own pace, at your own time, and if it truly feels right for you.
Thank you.
I would say really take this time to figure out how you connect to other people and connect to those people. Like I said, being a vet is not just about playing with dogs. There are people attached there. And a lot of our job in our world is about connecting to other people. So value those connections, seek those connections, kind of embody those connections, because this is ultimately what my job, what Will's job, and what Dr. Mejia's job all come back to in the end, is being connected to other people.
Well said.
For in my experience, I would say, you know, if you're doing a thesis or you're doing a research paper, and you have a choice on a topic, try, if you can, pick something that you definitely want to write about. You know, as you go through your career, you'll probably end up writing a paper or two on a topic that you may not have chosen or you thought you'd be interested in, and you get through it and you realize this isn't for me. But when it comes time to write that thesis, make sure it's something you're interested in, because if you get, in my case, it was something that I was very interested in. But I've heard stories from other people, you know, they get halfway through the thesis and they're just like, I just have no interest in this anymore. And, you know, they kind of, it's very hard for them to push through. So study if you have the choice, what you love.
Very great advice. And thank you again, everyone. And Valerie, I think, is going to say some closing words for us.
Thank you all so much. I think this panel was so valuable in so many ways. I think we got a lot of really great advice academically, professionally, and some really great life advice as well. So I know I'm going to take some of that back with me as well. So I wanted to just thank all of our panelists for coming out tonight, our alumni and students who participated, and of course our moderator. And I'd like to thank the College of Sciences Alumni chapter. I hope everyone learned a lot tonight. I know I did. And we had so many questions coming in and some really great interaction and engagement from the group. So if anybody has any additional questions, we're going to leave a slide up with some contact information for the College of Sciences. You're welcome to reach out to us. Dr. Mejia also shared her contact information, which I shared in the chat. And please feel free to reach out if you are interested in connecting further. We're going to be sending out a post-event email with a recording of today's panel, as well as information about our next panel event. So just to give you all a little preview, mark your calendars for October 21st at 6 p.m. We're going to be discussing how to get your foot in the door when you're applying for internships and jobs. So if you all would like to stay connected with the College of Sciences Alumni chapter, we would love to see you. I've posted the links again to our LinkedIn and our Facebook group. So please feel free to connect with us there. We'll be sharing more about these events and just things going on in the college. So thank you all again so much for tuning in and participated. And stay safe and go Knights and charge on.
Woo!